Walk into a small chapel in Rome, skip the center where everyone stops, and stand off to the side near the railing. Look up. The light spilling across Christ's arm suddenly matches the real daylight coming through the window behind you. Paint and daylight blur together like they're pouring from the same source. Caravaggio built that seam on purpose. He did it in The Calling of St. Matthew, painted around 1600, decades before anyone had the words to explain what he'd done. That changes what kind of painter you're looking at. Not a hothead who worked fast and loose, a man who calculated a room down to the floor tile. By the end of this, you'll know exactly how he pulled it off, and why it took 400 years for anyone to notice. But before we get to the one spot where it all lines up, we need to understand what's actually happening in this painting. The Contarelli Chapel isn't the main event at San Luigi dei Francesi. It's a side chapel, tucked off to the left, poorly lit even now with electric lighting helping it along. Most tourists walk in, glance up, snap a photo, and move on to something with better sightlines, which is honestly part of the problem we're about to get into. Inside the painting, Matthew sits at a table with a group of tax collectors, counting coins, doing the job he's about to abandon. Christ enters from the right side of the canvas, arm extended, finger pointed, calling him out of that life. Simple enough as a scene. Preachers have described it for centuries as a moment of divine interruption. Light cutting into darkness, grace arriving uninvited. But look at where that light is actually coming from inside the painting. It pours in from the upper right, tracking down across Christ's arm, landing on Matthew's face like a searchlight found him first. Now here's the anomaly nobody sat with long enough. The real window in that chapel, the one physical source of daylight in the room, sits on the opposite side, behind where a viewer would stand, which means the light inside the painting comes from a direction that doesn't exist anywhere in that physical space. For centuries, art historians wrote pages and pages about this. They called it dramatic. They called it chiaroscuro, the light and dark technique Caravaggio made famous, and they left it there, treating the glow as mood, as theatre, as a stylistic signature, and nothing more. Then someone actually measured the room, and the tape measure told a different story. That gap in the record shaped how an entire field talked about him for centuries. A hothead genius who painted fast and rough, not someone who could sit down and calculate a sightline like an engineer with a compass. That changed only in modern research, when people actually went in with instruments instead of instinct, measuring the chapel's architecture against the painted light source, tracing where the real window sat relative to where the fictional light seemed to originate. And what they found wasn't a coincidence, it was a map. Like Caravaggio had walked that chapel with a measuring stick before he ever picked up a brush. That's not dramatic license. That's a plan. Now, if we look at where that light actually leads, the first thing we notice is what he refused to paint. Painters before Caravaggio had a trick, and it wasn't a secret. Linear perspective. You draw lines that all converge on one point somewhere in the picture, and that point pulls your eye in, gives a flat wall the illusion of depth, makes a painted room feel like a room you could walk into. Renaissance painters built entire careers on this. Raphael used it, Leonardo used it, and they almost always put that vanishing point dead center, right in the middle of the composition, because centered felt balanced, centered felt correct. It's the same instinct that makes you frame a photo with the subject in the middle of the shot. Caravaggio doesn't do that here. Trace the table's edge in The Calling of St. Matthew. Trace the bench the tax collectors are sitting on. Follow the fall of light down through the composition. None of it points toward the middle of the canvas. All of it drifts right, toward a spot that lines up almost exactly with where the chapel's actual window sits. and with where a person would physically be standing if they walked in through the real entrance of that chapel. Think about what that means for a second. The lines inside the painting aren't converging where the composition looks nicest from a textbook photo. They're converging on a spot in the real world, a spot a human body would occupy on that specific stretch of floor. Stand at that spot and the tax collector's face catches light exactly the way it would if Christ were really standing there, arm extended just a few feet from where you're standing. Painters faked depth. Caravaggio built a seam between your world and his. Next time you see this image, even on a screen, do this. Look at the legs of the bench Matthew's group is sitting around and follow them back. You'll see both lines pulling toward the right edge of the frame, not the middle. Here's the contrast that matters. A centered vanishing point is decoration. It's a painter making a flat wall look pretty, look balanced, look like a stage set. What Caravaggio built is not decoration, it's engineering. He fixed a single correct viewing position into the paint itself, the way an architect fixes a keystone into an arch so the whole structure holds its weight in one place. And here's why that's worth sitting with for a second, because it's easy to let this slide past as a fun fact about brushstrokes. Single point perspective tied to the actual architecture of a room, built to work with one specific body standing in one specific spot. That idea, a vanishing point calibrated to a real body in a real room, wasn't pushed to this level of architectural precision until centuries later. Painters before him understood perspective on the wall. He understood it through the floor. And now we arrive at the detail that makes this more than clever. It makes it deliberate. Walk into the Contarelli Chapel yourself and don't stop in the middle like every instinct tells you to. Go to the low railing near the entrance, off to the side, where the real window throws actual daylight across your shoulder. Now look up at the painting from there. Something shifts. The painted light on Christ's arm and the real light coming through that window start to agree with each other. They blend at the edge of your vision, so the glow on the canvas stops looking like paint and starts looking like it's spilling out of the same room you're standing in. That's the trick most people miss, even when they're right in front of it. The average visitor stands dead center, glances up, snaps a photo and walks away. They never feel the shift, but walk in from the side the way a parishioner would, and the painting catches your eye from across the room like it's been waiting for you to arrive. That's not a metaphor, that's geometry. Stand center the way every art book photographs it, and that agreement disappears. The hand is just paint again. This is tenebrism doing its job. Extreme dark against extreme light, sharp enough to fool your eye into reading two separate light sources as one continuous beam, but only from that one angle. Priests entering that chapel never walked in dead center either. They came in from the side, exactly where the trick works. That's the gap historians studying flat photographs kept missing for years. Once you know to check a painting's light against the room it was built for, you can't stop doing it. You'll stand in front of any Caravaggio, in any church, in any gallery, and your eyes will go straight to the corner, hunting for the real window, checking if it lines up or fights against what's on the canvas. He appears to do this again in The Death of the Virgin, except flipped. Where Matthew pulls your eye toward the light, this one pushes you away from a body nobody in the room wants to look at directly. The logic runs backward there, and I'm not going to explain how here, because once you know to look for the mechanism, you'll want to go hunt for it yourself before I ever show you. That's its own case and it deserves its own video. This is the difference between looking at a painting and reading one. Once you see the machine, you can't go back to just admiring the picture on top of it. This wasn't an accident that historians dressed up with fancy language after the fact. It was calculation wearing the costume of spontaneity. And that changes what kind of artist you're actually looking at every time you stand in front of one of his paintings. Tell me in the comments if you've ever stood in that chapel yourself, and whether you noticed the light shift when you moved. And stick around for the next video, because the death of the Virgin hides a version of this same trick just running in reverse.